Hello, and thank you for joining me for Storytime with Mr. C. I am Mr. C, and for those of you who are back for even more, thank you so much for coming back. Welcome back, and for those of you tuning in for the first time, welcome. If you like what you hear, please go check out my first 4 episodes. Here on Storytime with Mr. C, I will be sharing stories that I have written, or a friend or family member has written, or maybe even something you have written. If you would like for me to share one of your stories here on Storytime with Mr. C, get your story or stories ready to go and shoot me an email at storytimewithmisterc@gmail.com. Again, that is storytimewithmisterc@gmail.com. And Mr. is spelled out Mister. I've also put the email down in the description for you. For now, I'm going to ask that you please keep stories to a maximum of 2,000 words, and please keep them family friendly. And maybe, just maybe, I will read one of your stories or some of your stories on future episodes here on Storytime with Mr. C. As always, a big thank you goes out to my buddy Russ for helping me out with my intro music. Russ is the bassist for local band Drive By High Five, and they will be playing at the Reed Park Zoo's Summer Safari Night right here in Tucson. That will be this Friday, August 8th at 6 p.m. And best of my knowledge, after that one, there is only one last Safari Night for this year at Reed Park. So go get it while you can and check out Drive By High Five. Also, as always, big huge thank you to Ben over at Chasing the Whimsy. You can find the link to his podcast down in the description. Please go check that out. Show him some love. And once again, Ben, as always, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. For this, our 5th episode, as threatened, I am going to step away from Father Allen for a bit and those autobiographical stories of mine, and instead I'm going to treat you to one of my spooky stories. So if you consider yourself squeamish, if you don't care for blood and zombies and a bit of grisly stuff, you may want to sit this one out. I personally think it's more of a sad story than a scary story, but have a listen. Tell me what you think. Let me know. All right, folks, enough babbling. Here we go with episode 5. Stand by.
Storytime with Mr. C.
Storytime.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of Storytime with Mr. C. This is the first of my spooky stories. This one is called Gabriel. Gabriel squeezed the knobby tire as hard as he could, checking for proper inflation just by feel. It was a little squashy, but it would at least get him over to McGrady's, where he was certain he could fill up with that long red air hose they had off in the corner of the lot. He checked the other tire, nice and firm, just the way he thought they should feel, in order to give him maximum potential for speed, whether it be on asphalt or in the dirt. He gave the wheel a spin for good measure, making sure it didn't wobble like it sometimes did. Looked good. He carefully tipped the Huffy onto its side and then grabbed hold of the wide handlebars. Monkey bars were what Teddy called them, and he got the bicycle back on its one firm tire and one slightly squashy tire. The squashy one was in the front. He would make certain to sit back further on his butt to relieve some of the unnecessary pressure on the poor underinflated tube. He hooked the kickstand with his foot and swung it down, and rested his prized possession at a slight angle, the handlebars twisting almost enough to pull it back over on its side. The gold glitter of the banana seat made him grin. He knew it was a little risque for an 11-year-old boy to have such a thing, and Chris even said it was gay, but Gabriel liked it very much. And Chris was usually a jealous jerk anyways. He ran his hand along the seat and saw how the bits of glitter caught the light of the sun just right. He thought it was cool, no matter what Chris said. The rear reflector hanging just below the back end of the seat was slightly askew, so Gabriel tweaked it just enough to get it straight. There. The bicycle his dad had gotten him at the swap meet last May was still awesome in his eyes. He didn't care if the tires often lost pressure, if the seat was gay, or if the handlebars were almost too wide for his young arms to even stretch across. This was his bike, and he took good care of it, just like his dad made him promise. Heck, he would even take it through the car wash over on Craycroft if his dad would let him. He was certain that would make it even shinier than it was already. Maybe he could even put that green tire cleaner stuff on the tires and make them shine too, just like Dad did with the Chevy. A distant whoomp sound brought Gabriel back to his senses, and he shook off his momentary stupor. Dad always did say he was a daydreamer. Mom said he was just focused. He considered the sound that had pulled him back to reality and decided it was somebody doing something at the Air Force Base on the south side of town. Whenever there were weird sounds like that, Dad would say, "Somebody must be doing something at the base." And that seemed like a good enough explanation for Gabriel. He knelt on the ground next to his wheeled steed and pulled back the large flap on his knapsack. An inventory of provisions was in order. He pulled out 5 sandwiches, an old 2-liter Coke bottle filled with water, one of the rags from his mom's kitchen rag drawer, a butter knife, 2 boxes of raisins, and a can of chunk light tuna fish in water. He wasn't sure how he intended to open the tuna fish, but he figured he would cross that bridge when he got to it. He inspected the sandwiches further and noted that they had become severely mashed riding around in his knapsack, especially with that Coke bottle in there. Oh well. Mom always said that it didn't matter how they looked, they would still taste just the same. And he had made these sandwiches himself, so he knew they were going to be good. Even if they ended up at the bottom of the knapsack under everything else for 500 days, he would find them and he would eat them because it wouldn't matter how they looked. Gabriel stared at the sandwiches for a moment as his stomach complained. He meant to save them for later. He would probably need them, but he was hungry now. The one with the marshmallow cream looked particularly tempting, its delicious creaminess smeared against the inside of the plastic baggie. He tossed the butter knife, raisins, and tuna fish back in his knapsack. "Hell with it," he said, mimicking a favorite of his dad's many common sayings, and then took a quick glance around to make sure no adults had heard his spontaneous burst of profanity. It wasn't the F word or even the S word, but it could still get him in trouble. He sat next to his knapsack and bike, placed the kitchen rag carefully across his lap, set the water-filled Coke bottle nearby, and tore open the sandwich. He took a massive bite, the kind Mom would scold him for, and chewed heartily. He was right. This one was the best. The marshmallow cream blended with the peanut butter and bacon bits just right. Creamy goodness with a touch of salt and just a little crunch for good measure. And while rye bread was far from his favorite, it at least did the job of holding all the goodness together. He downed the sandwich in 3 bites and followed it up with a long pull from his Coke bottle. He would fill it up at the garden hose before he left. He wiped the lingering bits of marshmallow from the corners of his mouth with the back of his hand and then paused. Mom would be seriously upset if she had seen him do that, and with a perfectly good rag sitting right there in his lap, too. He stared at the rag, still surprisingly clean, resting on the tattered knees of his 12 slim Sergio Valente blue jeans Mom had gotten him from Montgomery Ward's. Moisture welled up as his eyes grew red, and 2 beautifully sculpted tears rolled down his face, one over each slightly hollowed cheek. He gingerly plucked the rag from his lap and touched it to his mouth, and then slowly brought it up to his nose. It smelled just like it should. The cheap fabric softener in the pink box with a slight mustiness just underneath. It made his chest hitch as he fought back the tears now collecting just under his chin, rolling down his neck. He moved the rag to catch all of his evident sadness and took a deep breath. Dad would have told him to be a man. "Suck it up," he would say. "Shake it off. Nobody wants to see a man cry. Gabriel took another series of deep breaths, wiped his face once more with the rag, gave it another brief sniff, and then placed it back in the knapsack. He got to his feet and wandered through the tall weeds over to the spigot, which was just under the pyracantha bushes. He filled his Coke bottle and turned the water back off. Never waste the water. Everybody was always saying that, especially here in the desert. He walked back to his knapsack, shoved the Coke bottle in, and closed everything up. He double-checked all the straps and buckles, making sure nothing would fall out as he rode his bicycle. That had happened once with some of his favorite comic books, and he was never going to let that happen again. Especially not now. Not when everything he had was so very important. Even the stupid raisins. He hoisted the knapsack and adjusted it against his back so it sat just how he liked it. He scanned the ground around the Huffy to make sure he hadn't missed anything. Looked good. He turned his head and stared back at the house for a moment. He could feel himself starting to drift away again, so he shook his head against the memories. This was the house he had grown up in, at least since he was 4. He vaguely remembered walking into it for the first time when they moved from their tiny apartment on Mark Drive. Dad had been working feverishly to get rid of all the old wallpaper, but little bits of it had still clung to the living room walls. It had been a really weird color of greenish blue. All of the carpet had already been torn up, but Dad had promised he would take care of the floors right away. It only took him 4 years to fulfill his promise. And Gabriel had his own room, his own big boy room with a big boy bed and a toy chest for all his best stuff. It took his parents 6 months to finally get him to sleep alone in that big boy bed, once Dad finally agreed to a nightlight. This was the house he knew best. It was the place where he had learned almost everything he knew, both the good stuff and the bad stuff. Magic was real, but Santa wasn't. That one really sucked to find out. Comic books were awesome, school books were not. You could do almost anything you set your mind to, unless your opponent was bigger than you, and meaner than you. Mom was the one to run to if you got hurt, and Dad was the one to run to if you hurt someone else. You had to clean your plate. You had to do your chores. Money isn't everything, unless you don't have any. Girls could make you feel funny. Mom had the best smile ever, and monsters were real. Gabriel shook himself back. Gotta focus. Stuff to be done, places to go, people to find, maybe, hopefully, or maybe not. He would just have to find out and hope for the best. He had wandered closer to the kitchen door without even realizing it. Should he check again just to be absolutely certain? He knew nothing would be any different, but that small part of his brain that remained unrealistically optimistic really wanted him to find out. He dragged his feet through the dirt of the driveway and slowly approached the door he had gone in and out of hundreds of times, often faster than his mom approved of. He could just barely see through the window set into the door, but all it gave him was a view of the kitchen cupboards and ceiling. He inched even closer and pushed the door open with his foot. It creaked open with a sound very familiar to Gabriel's ears. His breathing became heavier as he moved into the kitchen. All of the drawers and cupboards had been pulled open and stripped of anything useful. His mom had done her best to keep them fed with what they had. Gabriel considered himself lucky that he'd found the marshmallow cream in Mrs. Johnson's pantry and the can of tuna fish in the Savco's garage. That one had been scary. He was positive that he had been found and ended up leaving all the other cans behind. He only had the one in his hand when he heard the noises. Gabriel came back to the present as he crept around the corner where the kitchen met the living room and stopped. The optimistic part of his brain shut down. Nothing had changed. They were still right where he had left them 2 days ago. Dad still lay across the threshold of the back door, his upper half on the little area rug with the paisley pattern that he hated, and his legs sticking out on the back porch, one shoe missing. His head was nearly gone, or resituated elsewhere to be specific. A spray of rust and gray had splashed just above the doorway and off to one side. The framed picture of his mom and dad at their wedding had suffered the most. Larger bits of flesh and bone smeared across the surface. obscuring the two smiling faces in the pretty white gown. Mom didn't have a choice. Dad was coming after her, and she had told Gabriel to run, but he had been too slow. Mom couldn't get the door closed fast enough, and Dad had come through. And something was really wrong with him. He had caught whatever thing the man on the TV had talked about. Everybody was catching it. They had said that even Chris and Teddy had caught it, and that was why he couldn't go and play with them anymore. And Mrs. Johnson had caught it, all of the Savco family, and then Dad. He was trying to push his way in the back door while Mom leaned against it. She had shrieked at Gabriel to run, but all he could do was stand in the living room and stare at the man he had called Daddy. The man who clawed at his mom with his lean arms, the same arms that had only ever hugged Gabriel a handful of times, but they had been some of the best hugs Gabriel had ever had. But the daddy man kept struggling against the door, and he was chomping his teeth really hard, too. So much so that it even looked like some of them had broken off. Blood had covered his face and beard, and his glasses were gone. Mom tried to push hard on the door, leaning against it with her back, but she was crying, and Dad was biting and clawing. And Gabriel had seen Dad's old shotgun, the one he said was a man's gun. It was lying on the floor just out of Mom's reach. Without thinking, Gabriel had picked it up. Man, it was really heavy, and he handed it to his mom. He looked up as his dad pushed further through the doorway, grabbing his wife's hair in his calloused hand. Mom shrieked more as Dad pulled and gnashed and reached and pushed. She brought Dad's shotgun up to her shoulder, right hand holding firm with index finger on the trigger, left hand wrapped white-knuckled around the barrel. Gabriel figured his mom had switched too much focus to the gun and had forgotten to push. That's when Dad lunged forward enough to make Mom lose her footing. Her feet slid out from under her as Dad's chomping teeth came down hard on her neck. She stopped screaming for just a second as Dad's lips curled back and Mom's blood shot out from between his broken teeth. Everything in Gabriel's world paused, kind of like what he would do with his movies on the VCR when he had to run off to pee. Dad pushed through the back door of their house, one hand in Mom's hair, the other against the door. His teeth clamped on her slender neck. Mom fell backward. The shotgun slipped just a bit, and then an ear-shattering blast made Gabriel's entire body recoil. Dad's head came apart like a watermelon hitting the pavement, and both he and Mom collapsed to the floor. Gabriel stood and fought to breathe as the ringing filled his head. Mom continued to cry, but Gabriel could not hear the sounds. The ringing was too loud. He dropped to his knees and crawled towards her, but she held her hand out in front of him, signaling him to stop. She was saying something to him, but Gabriel could not hear anything other than that damned ringing. He couldn't even hear himself as sobs racked his tiny frame. His mom dragged herself to her feet and made it only as far as Dad's favorite chair, the shotgun hanging loosely from her limp hand. She slumped back in the chocolate-colored Easy Boy, her eyes glazing over and her mouth hanging slack. Gabriel watched her, but he found that he could not even move. His ears had failed him, and now it seemed the rest of his body was steadily following their lead. His head felt as if it was full of molten lead on fire and wanting to pull him to the floor. Mom sank further into the chair, her petite body coated in gore, more of it pouring from a ragged hole in the side of her neck. She mouthed more words which were completely lost on her deaf boy. He tried to make them out, but his eyes were starting to fail him now, too. Mom struggled with the shotgun and brought the butt of it up into her lap. It seemed to take every last ounce of whatever she had left to pull the wooden part down and back up again. A red shotgun shell flew out from the side of the gun and landed near Gabriel, rolling until it rested up against his knee. It was empty. All of the dangerous stuff inside had come out and taken his dad's head. Gabriel looked back at his father, waiting for him to jump up and yell, "April Fools!" or something. Gabriel did not like this joke. He looked back at his mom. She had rested the shotgun against her chest, the barrel ending just under the sharp edge of her jaw. She was talking again, and Gabriel was starting to hear muffled sounds that might be her voice. Her milky eyes turned and locked onto Gabriel's, and she mouthed 3 last words. "I love you." The blast took off her jaw and sent it flying. Most of her face went with it, along with the top of her head. Her left cheek and eye were left intact, and they flopped forward on what was left of her neck, her once deep blue orbit still staring at her only child. Gabriel's world fell away, and all was darkness. When he came to, it was dark, but his hearing had returned, though the ringing sound was still very present. He was on the floor of the living room on his face, a puddle of drool under his cheek. He lifted his head, hoping that he had been dreaming, but he knew it wasn't true. Even before he saw his mom's Adidas at the foot of Dad's favorite chair, her feet were still in them, and most of her body was still attached to her feet. Most of it. Gabriel crawled to his mother's feet, rested his head on her sneakers, and slept for a long time. He would wake occasionally, check that Mom was still there, and then fade away again. He did this for what could have been days. He wasn't sure. He didn't care. He soiled himself repeatedly and neither ate nor drank for as long as he could manage. It was the smell and the hunger that eventually made him move. He stumbled to the kitchen, found some bouillon cubes on the floor, which he took back to the living room. He pulled the shotgun out of his mother's lap and replaced it with himself. He sat in his favorite spot, munching the cubes, while his mom sat in Dad's favorite spot and continued to rot. He eventually could no longer stand all of the flies and the smell of what had been his parents. He peeled off his rancid clothes and went into the front yard of his home. He stood shivering in his tidy whities as he used the garden hose to spray himself off. He dressed and collected what little he could find left in the house. He even considered the shotgun that had taken his parents' lives, but it was now empty and it was much too big for him as it was. He couldn't manage the thing and he didn't like it very much anyways. He tried to keep his eyes off of the bodies as he moved through the house, but it was hard not to take the occasional glance. He would have regular crying fits and often fall asleep on the floor, but he got to the point where he started venturing out of the house into the neighboring homes. He found very little. Some of his neighbors were dead. Most of them were just gone. He even saw Mr. Cowdery's dog one morning, but all it did was growl at him from behind a car and then run away. It became evident to Gabriel after a time that he could not stay any longer. He was going to have to leave his mom and dad and his childhood home if anything was going to happen. He loaded up his knapsack, checked out his bike one last time, and Gabriel shook himself back to the present. It was time to go. He knelt by his father and touched his hand to the back of his Joe Cool t-shirt. "I love you, Dad." He went to his dad's favorite chair and stared at his mom for a long time. He fought back the tears. "Nobody wants to see a man cry," he said to himself. He touched a matted clump of her beautiful auburn hair. "I love you too, Mama. I'll miss you." Gabriel turned and made his way out of the kitchen door for the very last time, fighting the urge to turn around once more. "I could turn into a pillar of salt if I do," he thought to himself. He stood in the front yard and surveyed what he could see of his block. Nobody anywhere. Another distant whoomp went off in the distance. Gabriel straddled his bicycle, adjusted his knapsack, and popped the kickstand back. "Somebody must be doing something at the base," he said, to no one but himself, as he coasted onto 15th Street, pointed the Huffy east, and pedaled like the wind. Thank you so much for joining me for this 5th episode of Storytime with Mr. C. That was Gabriel, the first of my spooky stories. What do you think? Which do you prefer, Father Allen or spooky stuff? Drop me a comment or even an email and let me know what you think. Tell me what you want to hear more of. Please let me know. For next week, I am going to return to Father Allen with our 6th chapter from my collection of stories about my father. That episode will be available on Sunday, August 10th, so please come on back for that one. In the meantime, go check out Ben's podcast, Chasing the Whimsy. Thanks again for hanging out and listening to my story. Hope you come on back for the next one. Until then, take care. Be safe.